Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's BOC Group webinar. The topic for today is integrated risk and control management, how your BPM and GRC can benefit from one another. During the webinar, you are encouraged to ask any questions. We will do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. Please use the side panel on the right side of your screen. And depending on the time left at the end, we will select one or two of them to answer. And for any questions that are left unanswered, we will be sure to answer them via email after the webinar. As a participant, your name and email are, of course, anonymous to the other viewers. So first of all, my name is Vincent Paquette. I am your host today. And as an expert on the topic, I would like you to greet my dear colleague, Mr. Tom Brennan, who will lead you through the content-related part of this webinar. Today, Tom will give us insights on the benefits of integrating BPM and GRC while also covering other important topics. However, before we get started, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the activities of the BOC Group. So BOC Group was founded in 1995 as a spin-off of the University of Vienna and today has more than 230 employees in 8 countries. We sell our products, implementation projects, and consulting services in more than 50 countries, building on with the support of a strong partner network. We are particularly proud that nearly 100,000 users of our free community editions have registered worldwide. And with this experience of more than 20 years in IT-based management domains, we now have more than 35,000 installations of our commercial software products in companies around the world. Our products from the BOC Management Office are primarily aimed at facilitating changes in business and IT, and we accomplish this by creating the necessary visibility into your process architecture or enterprise architecture that helps you better understand and control change. The portfolio of our products include the well-known Adonis for business process management, analysis, and optimization, Ado IT for IT management and enterprise architecture, and GRC for governance, risk, and compliance. All of these products embrace a powerful common platform allowing users to model processes or architectures, run analytics and reports, assess risks, and more through a web-based approach. This platform is characterized by very high flexibility in the configuration, allowing the implementation of very specific customer requirements through customizing. Our international customers, as well as renowned analysts such as Forrester and Gartner, have become increasingly aware of us in recent years and are positive testimony to our developments and future plans. We are particularly proud of our results in the Forrester Wave for Enterprise Architecture Management Suites. From this study, we actually emerged as a global leader with our EA Suite Ado IT. And more recently, in 2018, we are in the Gartner Magic Quadrant as a visionary company. Please take a few minutes and browse through the respective reviews and reports on our website. So Tom is actually prepared and will guide you through the topic, integrated risk and control management, how your BPM and GRC can benefit from each other.
Okay, thank you very much, Vincent, for the introduction. I would also like to welcome all of our attendees to today's webinar. As Vincent said, my name is Tom Brennan and I've been working here at the BOC Group. I work as an EA and BPM consultant, and in today's short session I'm going to talk to you about integrated risk and control management and how BPM and GRC can be mutually beneficial for each other. So what can you expect from today's webinar? We're going to begin today with some definitions of risk and what we actually mean by an internal control system. We will then take a look at some of the reasons for and some of the objectives of operational risk management, and then I will introduce our integrated GRC and see how we can embed the 3 lines of defense model into your organization, so we can see what we mean by 3 lines of defense. We'll then look at how to implement an integrated GRC solution using the BOC GRC framework, and we will see how we have integrated GRC with our Adonis BPM solution with a short demo towards the end of the session. So just some definitions to begin with. The definition of risk from ISO 31000 states that a risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So basically the effects of any kind of deviation from expectations can either be positive or negative, and the uncertainty is typically estimated using probabilities or kind of likelihood of the risk actually occurring. Operational risk then is defined as the risk of losses stemming from inadequate or failed internal processes. It could be people, systems, or even external events, which could include any legal risks that you need to be compliant with. But operational risk can also affect client satisfaction, the reputation of your company, and maybe shareholder value if you are in the news for the wrong reasons. But all the while, it's going to increase the business's volatility. So operational risk, therefore, needs to be managed in that sense. But risk management can also be defined as something that encompasses all processes and behaviors designed to identify potential events and developments, and then to manage the organization in terms of risk, and in order to ensure the reasonable assurance of the achievement of your objectives. So just another definition there on what risk management is. But company-wide risk management should be a process that's carried out by supervisory and management bodies, executives and employees of an organization, used in strategy setting and within the overall organization, and also be designed to recognize that any event can affect your organization, but also being in a place to be able to provide reasonable assurance to the achievement of the organization's goals. So it's a kind of a similar take on that. And lastly, an internal control system can be defined as the process to ensure the achievement of business objectives in compliance with regulations, both in terms of their effectiveness and also efficiency, correctness of financial reporting, and in accordance with a legal framework. So it is therefore the kind of totality of all of your processes, your methods, your measures, any initiatives you have, as well as the process-related monitoring of your initiatives to ensure that you have proper operational procedures in place. Okay, so looking at some reasons for managing operational risks. So what are the main factors that influence our decision-making when it comes to implementing an internal control system and really having a requirement for the governance, risk and compliance services, especially that BOC offer now with Adonis. And as the risks are typically related to our existing processes, we have some reasons here. So it could be one trigger, could be trying to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of your operational business activities. You could have another one being trying to implement a risk management framework based on a industry standard such as COSO or one of the ISO standards for risk management. You may have to meet some legal requirements and comply with specific standard specifications in terms of risk management like solvency or Basel 2 or 3. It could also be the case that you're trying to remove or mitigate any risks when it comes to preparing for audit, and just to make sure that all of your financial reporting is above board and correct in terms of all of your transactions. Or you may just want to ensure that your company and all of its physical assets are secure and sustainable for the future. And the last reason for managing operational risk could be just to reduce or avoid any general hazards or risks that could affect your business. So what are the typical objectives then for operational risk management? Well, there's 4 kind of cornerstones of our suggested target model for operational risk management, being firstly to be able to be regulatory compliant, so being compliant with any legal requirements that affect your business or industry. Again, trying to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of your operational processes, or, as I said, securing your company's assets, so making sure you know where you stand, both especially on the balance sheet, and again, accuracy and reliability of the financial reporting, again, when it comes to audit time. But why is operational risk so important? So obviously, as I said, we've got various corporate laws or business laws or legal requirements or maybe some frameworks depending on the industry that you have to be compliant with. We could have ISO 27000 for maybe information security management, or one of the Basel Committee regulations, the BCBS 239, which is related to the principles for effective risk data aggregation and also risk reporting. Or, as we all know this year, with data protection, we have the EU GDPR for protection of personal data. So all of these issues are going to have an impact on your risk management, and having an internal control system to try and make sure that you're continually compliant year on year. Then, to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of our operational processes, we can think of our processes in terms of quality, time and cost, the typical ones, but you also have risks related to the completeness of all of your recorded transactions and your events, so what actually happens during your processes as they're executed. Again, you want to be making sure that your financial reporting is on time and that it's reliable, and that there needs to be transparency there and traceability, especially in terms of your processes, including the protection and of all of the process participants as well as their information. And in making sure that your company's assets, so your physical assets, are secure and protected. And again, for the survival of the company as a whole, there's going to be always risks related to both internal and external fraud, maybe money laundering, embezzlement, or things like corruption. And the fourth key objective is the accuracy and reliability of your reporting, especially, as I said, with the balance sheet. So you need to make sure that all of your transactions are accounted for, and all of the physical assets that you have are documented according to their up-to-date values. So whether they've appreciated, which would be good news, or maybe you need to depreciate in value some of your assets and record that, so you know at the end what your company rating is and what your actual assets are worth. So they're just some of the key kind of objectives around the whole concept of risk management with an internal control system. So before we continue talking about our approach to a more integrated system for GRC, I want to just give you a quote from Aristotle, which is quite self-explanatory. So that says, the whole is greater than the sum of all parts. So basically we want to try and cultivate and grow an environment where all of the areas of the business are working together, rather than in individual silos and having to constantly, maybe reinvent the wheel in different departments when it comes to audit time and to risk management in general. So each organization has different stakeholders who are going to be concerned with risk and who are involved in the risk management process. So with a more systematic approach, as we have here, you could have the risk manager, the compliance manager, maybe the security officer, and they're all working in their own individual silos with their own systems for managing risk, but nothing is integrated basically, and there's going to be a lot of wasted efforts and duplication, and there's no standardization or harmonization at all. The different department heads could use different terminology when talking about risk. They can have different methods, and obviously then they're all going to have different systems and tools internally for actually managing how they process and how they deal with risk management. So with a more kind of systemic approach to a more integrated governance, risk and compliance solution, we're trying to use a single tool as the source of all of your GRC related information and data, so a kind of a single data set in that sense. And in this case, all of the involved stakeholders will all be working on that same data set. But yeah, all of the gathered information then is really going to be stemming from the business processes and its related assets. So for example, we have a process that needs to be compliant with various laws and regulations. The process will have some associated risks and controls. There's going to be some data process going on in the business process along the way that needs to be protected. But again, each of the stakeholders are able to access the same information depending on their kind of topic or area of interest or responsibility. And then each individual stakeholder can perform their own role-based analysis on the central repository, and each have their own individual views and dashboards to support their requirements in a single tool like Adonis, for example, which we'll see shortly. So as I said, you're just really kind of avoiding any duplication of effort, having a centralized repository that each of the various department heads can pull their information from. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to make more efficient use of senior management's time from the various disciplines, like, as I said, compliance management or the security manager or the risk manager, and we'll be able to have kind of information at the touch of a few clicks based on their requirements and the views that they need. So that brings us to looking at a more integrated governance, risk and compliance framework in the context of the 3 lines of defense model. In terms of risk management, when we talk about defense, it's defending against the potential risks that you've defined. So basically, all areas of the organization are going to be involved in some way. And when we talk about the first line of defense here in the center of our circle, we're really looking at the typical operational management of your organization. So where your process manager is looking after the processes and everything that's more kind of operational that goes on in the center, but they're always going to be the first line of defense in both identifying and dealing with risk. The second line of defense will be the responsibles like your risk manager, your compliance manager, or maybe your chief security manager, who are ensuring that their interests are being met. And then the third line of defense will be the internal auditor, who will need to check everything is ready before any external audit is due. So this 3 lines of defense model is a standard method to introduce and try and realize a governance framework. So that's what we try and address in Adonis, especially with the role-based access to our solution. So based on which line you sit in, you're going to have a different requirements when it comes to using the tool. So that's what we try and provide with Adonis. So here is our approach to an integrated GRC solution with the support from Adonis. So in the center here, you can see all of our risks controls from the various departments: financial, operational, compliance, legal, and IT, and then any initiatives that are defined to make sure that we're kind of improving our risk and control management year on year as well, where any vulnerabilities lie. And on the left side, you can see all of the departments that you have in your organization from the second line of defense from the previous slide. And on the right hand side, you can see all of the basic functionalities that we provide in our GRC framework solution. So these are all directly related to supporting the needs of the various stakeholders from the second line of defense to enable them to perform their daily jobs. So we want to be able to reduce the tasks from all the way from internal control systems right down to data protection. We want the stakeholders from the various departments like risk, compliance, information security management, and data protection, all to be able to use the same risk assessment functionality and the same control implementation and the same reporting and analysis by following the same method. So this is really the tricky part when you're trying to find a solution to satisfy the needs of everybody on the left-hand side through functionality and method support in the tool to be able to kind of use the same terminology and manage and process risks and controls in the same way. So yeah, the challenge is just to get a common method for all of the different stakeholders to be able to analyze and control or analyze and evaluate the risks and controls that they have in the repository. So at BOC, we're focusing our integrated GRC framework by focusing on the process landscape as the starting point, but that's not the only asset in your organization that you could use as the starting point, or at least apply the same GRC principles to. In Adonis, you can use the other assets like the IT systems, maybe the organizational units, or infrastructure elements like applications could be the baseline of your kind of GRC approach. But for now, our kind of best practice at BOC is to manage everything based on or at least as a starting point from the process landscape level. And then the third and final part of the BOC GRC framework addresses the procedure or the kind of process model we apply. So in the first step, you're going to have your need to capture everything. So document your risk and control portfolio, describe them, structure everything, try and embed it into the organization and assign responsibilities based on the various departments and their defined focus. So during the course of the evaluation, the risk portfolio needs to be assessed in accordance with the agreed criteria to assess and test the controls maybe for their effectiveness, make sure that the tests are well designed, and also test on their operational effectiveness as well. So all of these activities need to be carried out kind of again and again on a regular basis, and the company should be required to try, or at least think about automating these appropriate processes and procedures so that periodically there's reminders in place to assess your risks and controls, inform the various parties that are involved, and handle any kind of necessary escalations or vulnerabilities, as I said, using the initiative management as well in Adonis. Then the content you have that's created and maintained is then used to determine what work is required, what change requirements are there in terms of the processes, and also if we need any new risks or improved controls with the help of all of the various analysis and reports possibilities within Adonis. And they form the basis then of the control information for improvement, meaning the discovery and the detection of any gaps, and also exploiting any potential opportunities as a result of your initiative. So basically the whole procedure then, as you can see, here's the full picture of the GRC framework. So the described approach on the previous slide just completes our methodology, and it's also understood as an iterative cycle, so kind of like a continuous improvement cycle, similar to the PDCA approach, or the Plan, Do, Check, Act that you could be familiar with. So the implementation of the framework is then integrated with the support of our products. So today we're looking at the Adonis support, but it's supported also by the full BOC Management Office in terms of GRC. Yeah, so our process model then, as I said, it's based on our process landscape level. So this is our idea of how to implement a GRC framework. We obviously begin with the process map at level 1, so the highest level view of all of your processes. Then when we break that down into our level 2 process map, you will have the processes described at a greater level of detail. Again, it may be still a rough documentation with some process characteristics. But it's here at this level where we can begin to apply our GRC framework. That's a good starting point as a best practice, as I mentioned. Typically here we can begin to document and assess our risks. We can define our key risks and key controls, and you then optionally have an option to go a level deeper and actually describe your detailed processes together with activities, roles, IT systems, logical flows, documents, and so on. But this isn't a requirement for the actual GRC framework, as GRC can be applied to the higher level view of your process architecture as a whole. But obviously normally people do go to the detailed process level, but the GRC and the risk assignments can remain at the level 2 map as required. So here we see just a kind of a picture of the process I've just explained step by step. So as we say, we start with our level 1 process map with all of our management core and support processes here. That's then broken down into our level 2 process maps, and as I said, we can decide to go a level deeper to our detailed process flow with our roles and documents and IT systems associated with individual tasks. But as I said, we typically start the GRC initiative from the level 2 process map. So again, here we begin to document the relevant key risks and controls and describe all related scenarios. And as a result, we can then begin to define our initiatives in the case of any control weaknesses that we discover. So we can define any process, activity, or even process independent risks, and also define the controls that are used to then deal with or cope with any potential risk. But the main point here is that you're all stakeholders involved, so whether you're from risk management, compliance, security, data, you're all working on a centralized repository of risks and controls that can then be used and accessed by all stakeholders. So yeah, this is just to see, looking at the GRC also from the controls perspective, so you can really apply it from coming from risk or coming from control. Basically your control could be implemented also in various assets, so you could either have it at the process level, at another assets level, like an application here, we have our credit manager application, or even at the task level. So as an example, we could have a risk that is affecting an asset such as the prepare credit request process, but the implementation of a control could also be another asset. So in this case, the credit managed application could have a control taking place that's there to manage a risk that's present in the prepare credit request process. So the risk is linked to the process at the process landscape level, but the control is actually implemented within a specific application. So it just goes to show the kind of integrated internal control system. But here you have questions that you can ask yourself. So you need to discover what risks arise, if there's any compliance violation, and then from a design perspective, within the internal control system, are there sufficient and adequate controls in place to cover any of the identified and assessed compliance risks? We need to make sure that our existing controls in place to prevent or detect compliance violations, and are these effectively enforced throughout the organization, and are they effective? So all of these questions that we have can then be answered using our risk assessment that should be performed periodically within the GRC solution, and we can also execute and test our controls to make sure periodically that year on year they've been actually carried out by the responsibles, to make sure that they're fit for purpose and actually there to mitigate the risks that have been identified. Okay, so this now brings us to the demonstration of a small part of the GRC solution and how we also approach it from a process perspective. So I'm just going to log in here to our GRC environment here. So basically all of the documentation activities are going to be performed by the Adonis users in the design and document scenario here. So we're just going to jump in here first before we go to the GRC module. So in here we can look into our model repository and start, as I said, from the high level process map. So here we have our process map for our fictional Addo money bank. So just once it opens, we can then see here, so you can already see from the company map or the process map level where certain risks are applied to our process groups or areas of our business. So we've got our management, core, and support processes. If we drill down into our financing processes, again, we're now on our level 2 process map. So this is where we can begin to really apply the GRC framework. If we want to see what we can document about a process, so we'll just focus on our create credit application process. We can double click onto the notebook. In here, it's where we can begin to see, okay, our process hierarchy structure is here. We can classify our process. So we see it's a core process. It's a very complex, but also mission critical. So it's an important key process as well. So that's our general kind of characteristics about the process. But we can then begin to look at what IT systems support the process, but also here on our risks and controls chapter, we can see what are the assigned risks for the process, but also any scheduled or associated risk assessments. So it's a risk assessment for a particular risk, but in the context of this single process. So that's the link between risk assessment, and process. But to get a more graphical view of all of the assigned risks and maybe what are the associated controls for this process, we can just generate a view. Quite quickly, we can right-click on the object, go to Create View, and look at a business impact analysis view on our process risk and control. So once we generate the view, okay, just take a second. So just zoom out a little bit. So it's just a way of graphically seeing, okay, we have our process object here, high-level process object, all of the associated risks, but we can automatically see that each risk at least has some reference controls as well. So we can see this control is used to mitigate 4 of the various risks that we have. So it's just one way of graphically visualizing the link from our process to the associated risks and controls. If we just select this now in the Explorer, we can look at the information in a slightly different way. So this time we can so that was just the risks and controls for a single process, but if we want to see the risks and controls that are associated with a bunch of processes, we can just select some here from our Object Explorer. Again, right-click, go to Create View, and this time we're going to create a matrix view. So our control, risk, and process matrix view here. So again, as I said, each of the different stakeholders that we have are going to have different requirements when it comes to looking at these views, or they're going to be viewing the same view or looking at the same view, but with different perspectives or points of interest. So here we can first of all see our processes on the left, our controls, and the associated risks here in the cell. We can change the view here to a heat map view. So we can look at the view here by visualizing the value at risk. So here we can quickly analyze the severity of the risks in context of the assets that are associated. So the asset in this case is the process. So the value at risk, which we see here, is calculated based on the likelihood, impact, and how easy it is to detect the risk. So the higher the value, the more severe the actual risk is. So the darker colored cells here are the areas where maybe you would need to focus as a risk manager to say, okay, we need to make sure that the right controls are in place to mitigate the quite severe risks. We can also change the view to color cells with multiple occurrences. So again, you can see maybe where, if we just scroll across here, so we've got this orange risk is appearing quite a number of times, so maybe that's another area where the risk manager may need to address why such a risk is happening so often, and so on. So just different stakeholders can have different needs on actually using the analysis that's possible from Adonis. So once you then are able to do your analysis, this is very specific in the design and documents scenario to make sure that everything is documented correctly. But then to assist all of the various stakeholders to make sure that they can keep everything up to date, we have the governance, risk, and compliance scenario here. So I can just switch to that quickly. So here we've got individualized dashboards. So I'm logged in as a kind of a power user here, so I've got lots of things I need to take care of. So we can see here things about my risks, tasks I have around my controls, and also on my initiatives. So I've got some assessments to do both on the risks and the controls. I can see what risks I'm actually responsible for. If we just jump into my assessments, we can then see maybe what tasks I need to perform. So you can see our risk assessments here. We can see the assigned risks. We can see the likelihood, impact, and detection of each, and also the value at risk is also visualized here as well. So you can see that there's some risk assessment schedule. There are some under assessment. So maybe we take the one here. If we click on the actions button, you can see what you can do here. So we can actually perform the risk assessment. So in this case, this risk assessment was associated with the process we just looked at, but the likelihood and impact has not been documented yet. So we can go in and perform the risk assessment, update the likelihood. We'll say it's likely risk, and the impact is going to be high. And we can just add a comment here for the person who will be doing the methodical review of the assessment. So there's a workflow here as well. So you perform the risk assessment, but somebody needs to then check to make sure everything is okay. You can also specify who you would like to perform the risk, and also state whether or not it's a key risk for now. But once we save the risk assessment, it is then sent to methodical review. And it's also possible to look at the history. So there's if we look here, we can see the assessment history, so you can see how the risk has changed over time and what the state is and what the impact detection and likelihood is if it's changed. So the history is also there every time a risk assessment is performed. But another way of getting a good overview of all risks graphically is using our portfolio view. So I can just go back here and select all of our risk assessments, and up here I can use the button to just create a portfolio view. So we can look at a portfolio view on all of the risk assessments based on the failure mode and effects analysis. So this graphical portfolio analysis lets me directly identify the risks that require some urgent action and allows me to then plan and implement any necessary actions or initiatives. So here in the portfolio view, obviously risks that are appearing in the upper quadrant here are the more severe risks that are continuously happening. Their impact is very high, but the detection rate is very low. So you can see the detection rate here is indicated by the size of the bubble, so that this would be somewhere where a risk manager may need to actually focus their attention in terms of making sure the right controls are in place. But that's what the dashboard here does. It just keeps you up to date, and based on your role, you will then have specific tasks to perform on the risks, controls, and also on the initiatives. Okay, so that was just a quick kind of overview of the GRC scenario and how it links back into your business processes at the company map level. But I'm just going to jump back now to the slides and again continue looking just to recap on the target image of an integrated GRC solution that we talked about earlier to be able to support the various departments and stakeholders that we have on the left-hand side with tool functionality to support the risk assessment or the control implementation or any control testing. So just to make sure that all of the reporting and analysis requirements that any department manager may have are actually met by the solution. But moving on, if we put this now at the center, we can see all of the different stakeholders we may need to support. So from department managers to external auditors to the enterprise architect from the IT side to the typical quality ICS and risk managers. But again, we just want to be able to make sure that they're all working together in one centralized repository managing the risks and controls that apply to their area of responsibility. But it's all about terminology and method, and that we need to make sure that we have a kind of a standardized way of doing it. And to support all of the various roles and individual needs, we obviously have Adonis, which we've just seen in the demo, where we tie in the GRC framework with our business architecture and the repository of Adonis, using the processes as the main kind of baseline, but not forgetting that we can also apply the same principles to the other assets. So with Adonis, it's, as we saw earlier, 100% web-based. We can provide individualized views and dashboards to the different user groups, to the different stakeholders, and it's very flexible in terms of configuration and yeah, intuitive to use, so users are able to typically get up to speed quite quickly. So if you would like to unite and integrate your risk management and business processes together, then I hope you'll consider Adonis MP with the GRC solution. So again, it's the single source with the integration of your business process management, internal control system, operational risk management, all together in one single data set or one single database. And again, it's convenient and intuitive, and with web-based environment, we're able to support your decentralized roles in the ICS and operational risk management. So you can easily identify where your vulnerabilities and any then associated opportunities, and making sure that you're always audit ready as well. So please feel free to organize a more one-to-one demonstration with one of our GRC experts. You can request that online here at the link below. But that takes me to the end of my part of today's session, so I'm now going to hand you back to Vincent, who is going to take you through the closing part. So thanks again for joining, and hope you join our webinars again in the future.
All right, Tom, thank you very much. We will now just take a quick look at some of the upcoming events here at the BOC Group. Our next webinar, Enterprise Portfolio Management with TOGAF and Archimate, your basis for sustainable and company-wide change management, is taking place on the 22nd of November. And the webinar, Optimizing Business Process Methods and Best Practices, is taking place on the 6th of December. Also, don't forget that a variety of useful articles and webinar recordings are also waiting for you in our online library. Well then, I would like to close today's webinar. We would gladly answer the open questions by email in the coming days. I'm very happy to see that so many people took part today and hope that we can meet your expectations for today's webinar. Do not forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about free events and interesting news. It would give us a great pleasure to receive your feedback on this webinar, so you will receive an email from us in the coming days asking for your opinion. On behalf of Tom and I, we wish you all a pleasant day. Thank you.